June 6, 1944, 6:32 a.m. James Holloway was 23 years old when he saw hell for the first time. He didn't know that yet. In that moment, all he knew was that the ramp of the landing craft was about to drop, and his fingers were shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. Around him, 32 men were breathing heavily. Some were praying, others were vomiting. An 18-year-old kid from Alabama was crying silently, tears mixing with the seawater flooding the boat. The sergeant shouted something no one understood. The ramp fell, and the world exploded. The first man didn't make it 3 steps. Holloway saw his head burst apart before his mind could even process what was happening. The second fell into the water, the third, the fourth. German machine guns, positioned on the cliffs above, cut through them like a scythe through a field of wheat. The water was cold, so cold it burned. Holloway jumped, not because he was brave, because the men behind him pushed him. He sank immediately. The 35-kilogram pack dragged him down like an anchor. His lungs screamed for air. He saw bodies floating around him, rocking with the waves, eyes still open, staring at nothing. "I'm going to die here," he thought. "I'm going to drown before I even reach the beach." But something inside him refused. His fingers found the buckle of his pack. He released it. The weight vanished. He surged upward, coughing up salt water and someone else's blood. The surface was red, not pink, red, like spilled paint in a massive puddle. He couldn't hear anything but explosions and screaming. He couldn't see anything but smoke and bodies. He couldn't think of anything but move. Just move. Holloway ran, not forward. There was no direction. He ran because standing still meant dying. Bullets whipped the water around him. Men screamed the names of mothers, wives, God. A soldier beside him exploded when he stepped on a mine. Pieces of him rained down on Holloway. He kept running. 50 meters felt like 50 kilometers. Every step was Russian roulette. Every breath could be the last. He saw a lieutenant with half his face torn away, still trying to give orders. He saw a medic working on a soldier who was clearly already dead. He saw men drowning less than 3 meters from the sand because they were too wounded to stand. And then, somehow, he would never know how, his feet touched the sand. Not safety, just sand. Because the beach was worse, there was no cover, none. The concrete wall was more than 200 meters away, and between Holloway and that wall, there was nothing but open ground, barbed wire, and bodies. So many bodies that in some places they formed piles. He threw himself down, pressed his face into the wet sand, and heard bullets pass centimeters above his head. A soldier fell beside him, clutching his stomach, trying to push his insides back in. "Help me," the man whispered. "Please, help me." Holloway looked at him, just a kid, maybe 19, blonde hair, blue eyes already going glassy. "Help me," he repeated. Holloway reached out his hand. A mortar explosion buried them in sand. When Holloway cleared his eyes, the kid was dead. He never even knew his name. Here was the truth no one had told him. War wasn't about flags or honor or patriotism. War was about surviving the next 5 seconds, and then the next 5, and the next. Holloway crawled. Other men crawled beside him. They were no longer a unit. They were just frightened animals trying to find a hole to hide in. He passed a soldier praying the Lord's Prayer, past another reloading his weapon with blood-covered fingers, past a third who had simply given up, sitting in the sand, staring at the ocean, waiting for the bullet that would find him. It took Holloway 23 minutes to reach the wall. 23 minutes that felt like 23 years. He slammed himself against the concrete, every muscle shaking, every nerve screaming. Around him, the survivors did the same. Out of a company of 180 men, Holloway counted maybe 40. Maybe? It was hard to count when some of them were in pieces. A lieutenant, not his had died in the water, shouted orders. Holloway didn't hear them. His ears were ringing. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He looked at his hands. They were covered in blood. He didn't know if it was his. He looked back at the ocean. The water was still vomiting boats, still vomiting men, and the German machine guns were still cutting them down. Dozens, hundreds, falling like dolls, turning into statistics, into numbers, into condolence letters that would be sent to homes that would never see them again. This was supposed to work, Holloway thought numbly. The plan was supposed to work. But the plan was dead. The officers were dead. The radios were at the bottom of the ocean, and they still hadn't even left the beach. By nightfall, after 6 hours that felt like 6 days, they finally pushed inland. But the chaos didn't end. It just changed shape. In the hedgerows south of Sainte-Mère-Église, the soldiers learned a terrible truth. It was easy to get lost. One wrong turn in the fog, a retreat that went too far, a patrol that never came back. The front lines shifted like water, and men found themselves on the wrong side of them without ever knowing how it happened. Some veterans later said that this was where the real nightmare began, being trapped in occupied France, behind German positions, with no radio, no map, and no idea which direction led to safety, hiding in barns while patrols passed by, drinking from puddles, watching friends die silently because a gunshot would give them away. The army had no numbers for these men. They were listed as MIA, missing in action, maybe dead, maybe captured, maybe still fighting somewhere out there in the dark. Command didn't send rescue missions for them. There weren't enough men. There wasn't enough time. The invasion had to keep moving forward. But someone went back anyway. No one knows exactly when James Holloway began going behind enemy lines. There were no official reports, no medals, no after-action reviews that mentioned his name. What we know comes from fragments, letters written decades later, stories shared in veterans' halls, whispered testimonies from men who made it home and never fully understood how. A sergeant from Pennsylvania remembered it this way. He was pinned down with 3 others in a farmhouse for 2 days, surrounded by German positions, no food, almost no ammunition. They were preparing to surrender when someone knocked on the cellar window just after midnight. An American soldier, alone, dirty, with wild eyes. He drew a map in the dirt, showed them a path through the German lines, led them back during a storm that covered their movement. The sergeant asked his name. The soldier said it didn't matter. Then he disappeared back into the darkness. A corporal from Ohio told a similar story. So did a soldier from Michigan and a radio operator from Georgia. Different nights, different locations, same description. A lone soldier who appeared like a ghost, who knew German patrol routes, who moved through enemy territory as if he had memorized every tree and shadow. He never stayed, never asked for recognition. He just pointed the way home and vanished. Holloway went back because he couldn't stop seeing their faces. The men in the water, the ones who drowned because their packs were too heavy, the ones who begged for help and didn't get any. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw them reaching out. So when he heard about men trapped behind the lines, he didn't think. He just went, alone most of the time. Sometimes with another soldier crazy enough to follow him. They moved at night, avoided roads, navigated by moonlight and memory. Holloway learned to tell German voices from French ones, learned which dogs would bark and which wouldn't, learned how to find lost soldiers by thinking like a lost soldier, where you would hide, where you would run, where you would make your last stand. He pulled men out of ditches and cellars and burned out tanks. He carried wounded soldiers on his back for kilometers. Once, he led 17 paratroopers back to Allied lines using nothing but a broken compass and stubborn faith. And every time, he refused to let anyone write it down, because it wasn't about glory. It was about the debt he owed to the men who never made it off the beach. The ones he couldn't save. Those who survived remembered one thing clearly. His eyes, not fearless, haunted. The eyes of a man who had seen too much death and decided he wouldn't accept anymore. The war ended on May 8th, 1945. James Holloway returned home to Nebraska with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart for a shrapnel wound he never spoke about, and nothing else. No Silver Star, no Distinguished Service Cross, no mention in the division's official history. The men he saved tried to find him over the years. Letters went unanswered, phone calls led nowhere. Some heard he had settled on a farm near Lincoln. Others said he had moved west and changed his name. A few claimed they saw him once, years later, at a reunion. But he left before anyone could thank him. He died in 1983. The obituary was 3 sentences long. No children, no wife. Survived by a sister. But here is what the obituary did not say. Somewhere between 60 and 80 soldiers came home from World War II because of him. They had children. Those children had children. Teachers, doctors, farmers, mechanics. Lives that existed because one man kept going back into hell while everyone else was trying to get out. Their families do not know the name James Holloway. History books do not record his missions. The military does not count his rescues. But the math is simple and permanent. He saved men who went on to build a world he would never see. He created futures he would never be part of. He gave everything and asked for nothing, and when he died, almost no one noticed. That is the cruelest part of war. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen in complete darkness, witnessed by no one, recorded by nothing, rewarded with silence. And sometimes, if you listen closely to the stories old soldiers tell when they think no one important is listening, you will hear about a man who kept going back, who would not leave anyone behind, who disappeared into history the same way he disappeared into those French hedgerows, quietly, deliberately, without asking for recognition. His name was James Holloway, and he mattered, even if the history books forgot, especially because they forgot. Because the true measure of heroism is not what gets recorded. It is what happens in the dark, when no one is watching, when there is no reward except knowing you did what was right. Some wars are fought with medals and monuments. Others are fought by men who simply refuse to leave their brothers behind. This is the story of one of them. The story no one was supposed to remember. The story that must never be forgotten. This story is inspired by real historical events and the experiences of countless soldiers. While James Holloway is a fictional character, men like him were very real. If this story moved you, honor them by subscribing, sharing, and remembering those who carried others out of hell and were never named.